I've always felt a strange sense of vulnerability when I'm home alone. This weekend, my mom left for her sister's place, leaving me in the care of Sam, a man I had known since I was little. Up until now, Sam had always seemed kind and steady, but that evening, something about his behavior felt off. It started in the early evening when I was quietly making myself some tea in the kitchen. I heard soft footsteps outside the door, and soon Sam entered with a bottle of red wine in his hand. He offered me a gentle smile as he set 2 glasses on the counter. "Would you like a glass of wine?" he asked in a calm, friendly tone. I hesitated for a moment and replied, "No, thank you. I'm fine." Although his words were polite, there was something in his eyes, a subtle intensity, that made my heart beat a little faster. The familiar comfort of that evening began to unravel. The soft glow of the kitchen light and the background hum of a radio seemed to slow time down, and yet I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. My instincts whispered that I should be cautious, but I wasn't quite sure why. Shortly after, Sam suggested we step outside for a breath of fresh air. "Let's go out to the backyard for a bit," he said. "It's a beautiful night to look at the stars." Although I was hesitant, I agreed, thinking that a little walk might help clear my mind. Outside, the cool night air, the gentle rustling of leaves, and the soft light from the porch created an atmosphere that was usually calming. But tonight, every shadow and every sound seemed to echo with an inexplicable tension. During our walk, Sam talked about ordinary things, work, the weather, and future plans for the house. His tone was pleasant, yet there was an undercurrent of something unspoken. I noticed that sometimes his gaze lingered on me a bit too long, as if he was searching for something beyond a friendly conversation. I tried to focus on the stars overhead, but my thoughts kept drifting back to his intense eyes. When we returned to the house, Sam stayed a few minutes to help me tidy up. He moved about quietly, but his presence felt heavier than usual. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I couldn't shake off the sensation that I was being watched. Once in my room, I tried to relax by reading a book and watching some videos online, but every time I heard a creak or a distant sound, my pulse quickened. The unease from the evening had planted a seed of worry that refused to vanish. That restless night, sleep came in fitful fragments. I woke several times, each time certain that someone was lurking nearby, even though I was alone. In the dim light before dawn, I lay awake, heart pounding, haunted by the echoes of that unsettling evening. The next morning, as sunlight filtered into the kitchen during breakfast, I tried to dismiss the lingering feeling of dread. I recalled Sam's kind smile, yet his intense gaze made me wonder if I was misinterpreting his behavior. "It's probably just my imagination," I reassured myself as I sipped my tea, trying to find a rational explanation for the strange events of the previous night. Throughout the day at school, I found it hard to concentrate. Thoughts of Sam's peculiar behavior kept swirling in my mind. His words had seemed rehearsed, and his occasional, too personal compliments left me feeling oddly exposed. I kept replaying his invitation to step outside and his lingering glances, questioning whether I was overreacting or if my instincts were warning me about something serious. After school, when I returned home, the house felt different, a quiet place that now held an undercurrent of tension. In the early evening, I busied myself with homework and tried to distract my thoughts, yet every time I heard the door open or a faint sound in the hallway, I felt that same prickling sense of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that the events of last night were only a prelude to something more unsettling. Later that day, as I was about to settle in my room, I saw Sam in the living room. He was seated quietly, reading a newspaper, but when our eyes met, he gave a slight nod that was hard to interpret. His behavior was calm and collected, yet I sensed an undercurrent of attention directed at me that made me uncomfortable. I wondered if it was just my imagination or if there was something more in his thoughtful expressions. I tried to remind myself that I'd known Sam for years and that he had always been kind, but the contrast between the person I remembered and the man I was experiencing now was impossible to ignore. The dinner that night was uneventful. Sam prepared a simple meal, and while we sat at the table, the conversation remained on mundane topics. Yet, every so often, his eyes met mine, and I felt as though he was trying to communicate something beyond friendly care. After dinner, I excused myself early and went to my room. I locked the door and sat on the bed, replaying the day's events in my mind. I couldn't pinpoint what had changed, but the steady undercurrent of unease was undeniable. My intuition screamed that I should be cautious, but I struggled to understand exactly why I felt so unsafe in a place that had once felt secure. That night, I lay in bed for what seemed like hours, each sound magnified in the darkness. The house, usually a sanctuary, felt like it had transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and uncertain shapes. My thoughts drifted back to Sam's intense gaze and his carefully chosen words. They echoed in my mind like a refrain, urging me to be alert and to trust my feelings, even if I couldn't fully articulate what was wrong. By the time the new day broke, I was determined to keep my distance and remain vigilant. I decided that as soon as my mom returned, I would talk to her about my concerns. In the meantime, I resolved to be extra cautious, to listen to my inner voice, and to pay attention to any signs that might warn me of further discomfort. Even now, as I sit here writing down these thoughts, the events of that strange evening haunt me. The ordinary moments of that day have been overshadowed by an inexplicable tension that I can't seem to shake. I keep wondering if I misread the situation entirely, or if there is indeed something in Sam's behavior that I must be wary of. I know I must remain strong and protect myself, even if it means questioning the actions of someone I once trusted. My mind is a whirlwind of doubts and fears, yet I cling to the hope that by staying alert and following my instincts, I can navigate whatever challenges may come next. Tonight, I'll try once again to find some peace, and maybe tomorrow will bring clarity. Until then, I will continue to trust that small voice inside me, the one that insists I remain cautious in a world that sometimes hides its true nature behind a familiar smile. The following day, I woke up with a heavy heart and an even heavier mind. The uneasy feeling from the previous night lingered like a shadow, and as the morning light filtered through my window, I couldn't shake the thought that something was off. I tried to focus on my daily routine, getting ready for school, completing homework, but every time I caught a glimpse of Sam or heard his voice, my pulse would quicken unexpectedly. At school, I felt distracted, as if I were constantly on high alert. I'd replay his words and the way he looked at me, trying to piece together the meaning behind his behavior. In class, I found it difficult to concentrate on the lessons, and I kept thinking about the subtle changes in his tone and the lingering look in his eyes. I was torn between trusting the friendly Sam I once knew and the unsettling presence that now haunted my thoughts. After school, I returned home with a determination to keep my distance. However, Sam's presence was hard to avoid. That afternoon, as I sat in the quiet living room working on a school project, I noticed him entering the room without a word. He simply sat at the table, his eyes occasionally shifting in my direction as if silently urging me to notice him. I tried to focus on my work, yet every pause felt like an invitation for a conversation I wasn't ready to have. He eventually broke the silence, asking about my day in a tone that was overly gentle. "How was school, Mia?" he inquired, his voice soft and measured. I responded with a simple, "It was fine," hoping that a brief answer would suffice. But his gaze lingered, and I couldn't shake the sensation that he was studying me, observing not just my words, but my every reaction. It wasn't malicious, I told myself, yet the disquiet inside me kept growing. Later that evening, Sam approached me as I was preparing dinner with a casual smile. "I thought it might be nice if we had dinner together," he suggested, his tone light but carrying an edge that I couldn't quite decipher. Reluctantly, I agreed. Dinner was a quiet affair, punctuated by moments of forced conversation. Sam's compliments, which I had once brushed off as genuine kindness, now felt oddly calculated. He mentioned how mature I seemed for my age and how much he admired my thoughtful nature. Though his words were meant to reassure, they only deepened the knot of anxiety in my stomach. Throughout the meal, I tried to keep the conversation superficial. I answered his questions with short responses and focused on the clinking of utensils against plates, desperately trying to create a barrier between my thoughts and his piercing, often unsettling, scrutiny. Every so often, his eyes would meet mine, and I'd feel as if he were trying to connect with a part of me that I wasn't ready to reveal, a part that was fragile and deeply uncertain. After dinner, I retreated to my room, seeking solace in solitude and the comfort of familiar books and music. I locked the door behind me and tried to lose myself in a novel, but the silence was quickly broken by the memory of his lingering questions and the soft cadence of his voice. I found myself wondering if I was overreacting or if my intuition was warning me about something that was slowly becoming more ominous. As the evening wore on, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was not entirely alone in the house. I heard the faintest echoes of footsteps in the hallway, and every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. I kept my phone close, a small lifeline in a situation that felt increasingly isolating. I began writing down my thoughts in a journal, hoping that the act of recording the day's events would help me understand the unsettling energy that seemed to surround Sam. The next morning brought little relief. The routine of school and homework continued, yet my interactions with Sam became more frequent. At first, it was only small gestures, a nod in the hallway or a casual greeting, but soon, these interactions began to feel deliberate. On my way home, I noticed him waiting by the front door, as if he had been expecting me. His smile, though still polite, now held an undercurrent that made me wary. I walked past him quickly, my mind racing with questions and doubts. Once back inside, I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. I busied myself with my studies and attempted to lose myself in familiar activities. However, whenever I glanced in the direction of the living room, I could almost sense Sam's eyes on me, following my every move. The once comforting walls of my home now seemed to close in, and the silence felt oppressive rather than serene. That evening, Sam invited me to join him for a quiet activity, a board game in the living room, which he insisted was a fun way to spend the evening. I agreed, thinking that perhaps engaging in a shared activity might help dispel the tension that had been building. As we sat at the table, the atmosphere was awkwardly formal. Sam's questions, though seemingly innocent, started to probe deeper, and he made comments about how our perspectives on life were surprisingly aligned. I tried to keep my responses vague, but the conversation left me feeling exposed, as if every word I spoke was being analyzed for hidden meaning. During a pause in the game, I couldn't help but notice that Sam's tone softened when he mentioned personal matters. "Mia, you have such a unique way of seeing the world," he said quietly, almost as if he were trying to create a connection that went beyond the game. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I felt a fleeting sense of warmth, before that warmth was replaced by an overwhelming sense of discomfort. It was as though his words were trying to coax me into a closeness that I wasn't ready for, and I instinctively recoiled. After the game ended, I excused myself early, saying I had some homework to finish. As I retreated to my room, I couldn't help but feel that the distance I craved was slowly slipping away. The house, once a safe haven, now felt like a stage where every move was being watched. I locked my door and sat on my bed, my mind reeling from the day's events. I felt an urgent need to express my growing unease, but I wasn't sure whom to trust or how to articulate the vague fear that gnawed at me. In the solitude of my room, I began to reflect on the subtle cues I had ignored, those quiet moments when Sam's words, though coated in a veneer of politeness, hinted at intentions that felt intrusive. I questioned if I was imagining things, or if there truly was something more sinister hidden behind his calm demeanor. I remembered the way his eyes had followed me throughout the day and the persistence in his questions about my personal life. With every recollection, my resolve strengthened. I needed to be vigilant. I decided that the next time I encountered him, I would be more assertive. I would set boundaries and insist on the space I deserved. But as I sat there, trying to muster the courage to confront these feelings, I also recognized how isolated I felt in this situation. My thoughts kept returning to the idea of confiding in someone, a teacher, perhaps, or a trusted friend, yet the fear of being dismissed or misunderstood held me back. As dusk approached once again, I steeled myself for another evening at home. I tried to focus on my studies, but the persistent thought of Sam's lingering presence made it impossible to fully concentrate. Each creak of the floor and every distant sound filled me with trepidation. I made a mental note to be extra cautious, to observe every interaction, and to document any behavior that made me feel uncomfortable. Now, as I sit here writing down these events, I can't help but feel that I'm on the brink of a revelation. The calm I once knew is steadily eroding, replaced by a growing awareness of the need to protect myself. I know that I must find the strength to voice my concerns, even if it means facing someone I once trusted. It's a lonely battle, but my intuition tells me that it's the only way to reclaim the safety I once took for granted. In this quiet moment of reflection, I understand that the challenges ahead are as much about finding my own voice as they are about deciphering the intentions of those around me. The uncertainty is daunting, yet I remain determined to navigate this path with caution and resolve. I'll continue to document these experiences, not only to remind myself of the importance of vigilance, but also as a testament to the strength it takes to stand up for oneself when the world seems to close in. For now, the lingering doubts remain, but with every passing moment, I find a small spark of determination, an inner promise to trust my instincts and seek the support I need. Tonight, I will hold on to that spark, even as the shadows around me grow longer. And tomorrow, I hope to find the courage to set the boundaries that will finally restore the sense of security I so desperately crave. I woke up one morning with a deep, unsettling heaviness in my chest, a feeling that the quiet tension in the house had shifted into something far more palpable. The events of the previous days had left me constantly on edge, and I knew that something had to change. Every interaction with Sam had grown more deliberate, and while I still clung to the hope that I was simply overthinking his actions, my intuition screamed that his behavior was crossing a line. That morning, I tried to focus on my schoolwork, but the gnawing anxiety was impossible to ignore. I kept glancing toward the living room, half expecting to see him there, his eyes fixed on me with that disconcerting intensity. The familiar sanctuary of my home had become a stage for a silent, creeping dread, and I felt increasingly isolated. I wished I could speak to someone, but I was terrified of being dismissed or misunderstood. After school, I resolved to make some changes. I decided that I would keep a careful record of every unusual incident. I began jotting down small details in my journal, the way his tone would change when he spoke, the subtle yet persistent glances he directed toward me, and the moments when the house seemed to echo with unspoken tension. This exercise helped me feel a bit more in control, even as the weight of the situation pressed down on me. Later that afternoon, as I sat in my room trying to concentrate on a school project, I heard footsteps approaching my door. My heart pounded as the door creaked open, and I saw Sam standing there with a hesitant smile. "Mia, may I come in?" he asked softly. I nodded, forcing my voice to remain steady, even though a tremor lurked behind my words. "Would you like to talk for a minute?" he continued, stepping closer. I swallowed hard, feeling the need to set a boundary rising within me. I'm not really comfortable with this," I managed to say, my voice wavering slightly. His smile faltered, and for a moment, the silence stretched between us. "Of course," he replied, stepping back. "I'm sorry if I made you feel uneasy." His tone sounded sincere, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that his apology was just a cover for something else. I forced a polite nod and closed the door behind him, my hands trembling as I leaned against it. That evening, the air in the house felt colder, and I found myself searching for any sign that my concerns were valid. I looked around my room, where the light from the street lamps filtered in through the window, casting long shadows on the floor. In that moment, I made a decision. I needed to protect myself more actively. I resolved to talk to a trusted teacher the next day about the strange behavior I had been experiencing. I wasn't sure if I could explain it all, but I hoped that sharing my feelings would bring some clarity, and perhaps help me find a way out of this oppressive situation. Dinner that night was unusually quiet. Sam had prepared the meal on his own and sat at the table as if waiting for me to join him. When I came down, he greeted me with his customary polite smile, but the warmth I once associated with him had been replaced by an air of caution. "How was your day?" he asked in a tone that was almost too soft. I offered a curt reply and barely touched my food, my mind reeling with thoughts of the conversation I was planning for tomorrow. After dinner, I retreated to my room as quickly as I could, leaving Sam to clean up in the background. Once the door was locked, I collapsed onto my bed, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and fear. The decision to confide in someone was not made lightly, but the persistent unease was too much to bear in silence. I spent the rest of the evening writing down everything that had happened, each small detail that might help me piece together the full picture of what was going on. The following morning, I mustered the courage to call Miss Carter, one of my most trusted teachers. I explained in halting, careful words that I had been feeling increasingly uncomfortable at home, that a man who was supposed to be a family friend seemed to be overstepping boundaries in ways that made me anxious. Miss Carter listened intently, her voice gentle and reassuring as she urged me to document everything and promised that she would help me navigate the situation. Her concern and willingness to support me provided a sliver of hope in the midst of my growing isolation. With that small measure of comfort, I resolved to be more vigilant. I started taking extra precautions, locking my door, keeping my phone close at hand, and making a habit of texting a close friend whenever I felt overwhelmed. Despite these efforts, the tension in the house continued to build. Sam's presence was inescapable, and his every move was laden with an unsettling significance. One particular evening, as I sat in the living room reviewing my journal notes, I noticed that Sam was unusually quiet. Instead of his normal routine of small talk or gentle inquiries, he remained on the other side of the room, lost in thought. I couldn't help but wonder if he sensed that I was taking steps to distance myself emotionally and physically. The silence was thick with unspoken words, and I felt as if I were being evaluated against some unspoken standard. Unable to bear the oppressive quiet, I decided to leave the house for a walk. The cool night air provided a temporary escape, and as I strolled along the quiet streets, I tried to put distance between myself and the constant pressure at home. The night was calm, and the soft hum of distant traffic was a welcome contrast to the strained atmosphere inside. For a brief moment, I felt free from the suffocating tension, a feeling that was both exhilarating and bittersweet. Returning home, however, I was met with the same disquieting stillness. Sam was waiting for me in the foyer, his expression carefully neutral. "Mia, you were out for a while," he remarked softly, his tone as measured as ever. I nodded curtly, feeling a surge of determination. I knew I could no longer remain passive. I had to assert my boundaries clearly. Over the next few days, I found small ways to reclaim a sense of control. I arranged my schedule so that I was rarely alone in the house for long stretches, spending more time in the local library or with friends. I kept a log of every interaction with Sam, noting even the subtlest shifts in his behavior. Yet, despite my best efforts, the feeling of being watched never fully dissipated. In a quiet moment one afternoon, while reviewing my journal in my room, I resolved that I would confront Sam directly if his behavior did not change. I couldn't let my fear turn into resignation. I rehearsed what I might say, trying to find the right balance between firmness and calm. I wanted him to understand that his behavior was unacceptable without escalating the situation further. That evening, when Sam approached me in the living room once again, I steeled myself. "Sam," I said, my voice trembling but determined, "I need to talk to you." He paused, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "What is it, Mia?" he asked softly. I took a deep breath and continued, "I appreciate that you want to be friendly, but I need you to respect my space. I feel uncomfortable with the way you've been looking at me and the way you seem to be always present around me. I need you to give me room to breathe." For a long moment, there was only silence. Sam's face was unreadable, his expression a mixture of regret and something else I couldn't quite decipher. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I'm sorry, Mia," he said, his tone subdued. "I never meant to make you feel this way." I searched his face for sincerity, hoping that his apology was genuine and that he would respect the boundaries I was setting. Although his words brought a small measure of relief, I couldn't fully shake the memory of the past few days. After that conversation, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere at home. Sam's interactions became more measured, and while he still offered the occasional kind word, he no longer lingered with that unsettling intensity. I felt a cautious sense of relief, yet I knew that trust, once shaken, takes time to rebuild. The echoes of the past remained, a reminder that sometimes our inner voices tell us truths that are hard to ignore. As I reflect on these events, I realize that standing up for myself was both terrifying and liberating. I've learned that protecting my emotional well-being sometimes means making difficult choices, even when those choices involve confronting someone I once trusted. Though the uncertainty still lingers, I'm beginning to understand that I have the strength to reclaim my space and my sense of safety. Now, with a quieter home and a newfound resolve, I prepare myself for what comes next. I still document my feelings and experiences, knowing that each word written is a step toward healing. My journey is far from over, but today I take solace in the small victories, a sincere conversation, the quiet moments of reflection, and the growing confidence to set boundaries. Even as shadows linger, I hold on to the belief that by trusting my instincts, I can find a way to navigate this difficult path and ultimately reclaim the peace that once defined my world. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild the life that I once thought was lost. The heavy atmosphere in our home slowly lifted as I continued to set clear boundaries and surround myself with the support I needed. With the help of Ms. Carter and a few trusted friends, I found the courage to speak openly about my experiences. Their understanding and compassion reminded me that I was not alone and that my feelings mattered. Sam's behavior gradually shifted, and although his presence still lingered in the background, I no longer felt trapped by his actions. I learned to trust my instincts more than ever before. Every day became a small victory, a moment of assertiveness when I refused an unwanted conversation, a quiet evening spent journaling my thoughts, and even the simple act of enjoying time at the library, safe among my friends. My mom returned one day and immediately sensed that something had changed. Over a heartfelt conversation, I shared my concerns and the steps I had taken to reclaim my space. Her relief and pride in my newfound strength gave me even more resolve to continue my journey of healing. I realized that my home should be a sanctuary, and I deserved to feel secure and respected within its walls. Now, as I stand on the threshold of a new beginning, I see the darkness recede, replaced by hope and determination. I have learned that protecting my emotional well-being is not selfish, it is necessary. The echoes of past fears still whisper in quiet moments, but they no longer control my future. I embrace the lessons of resilience, knowing that every small act of self-care and every boundary set is a step toward a brighter, safer tomorrow. I choose to believe that this is not the end, but the beginning of a chapter defined by strength, clarity, and the courage to stand up for myself. In this new dawn, I am finally free to live authentically, secure in the knowledge that I have the power to shape my own story.